All right, welcome to today's episode. Super excited to have Jessicka Anne here. Jessicka Anne is the founder and creator of Artemisia, a certification with the IICT and its world-renowned modality, which is the MCM modality. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Cody.
So the name of the podcast is Courageous Leaders Changing the World. I would love to know, what has been a moment in your journey where you've had to face off with summoning a deeper level of courage than you ever have before?
Than I ever have before.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Straight in.
I love it. Not like you at all. In life or in business?
Both.
I think in life, that was definitely when my husband passed away. I think that was that sense of completely losing the sense of who I thought I was and what had mattered. So just for context, and it's interesting when I tell this story now, it feels almost like I need to drive by the tragedy. It's almost like I get that it's deep and a lot of people are like, wow, that's a lot to go through. And I think with the amount of time I have spent with that experience, like there is still grief there. Grief is a nonlinear process. However, it's also, I have so much gratitude for what it's given me. So long story short, my husband passed away when he was 36 from pancreatic cancer. In the time period, like prior to that, so for 13 months, I was his full-time carer and looking after his two children. And I'd given up work. I was basically stay-at-home mum for the best part of that. And so there was this sense of my whole life screeching to a halt because we'd just got married just after his diagnosis. And so there was this period where all I knew was looking after him, looking after the kids, and kind of losing my identity in that real liminal space. And so when he left and when the kids went back to their biological mum, there was a sense of like, well, who am I now? Like, what is it that matters to me in the world? And having lost somebody so young, I was only 28 when he passed, there was that sense of like, I have such a clear perspective on we don't know how long we have here. And so for me, it was really about finding what was meaningful and what it is that I really wanted to give my heart to and why that mattered. There was almost that sense of you can have all these dreams and aspirations, but what if they don't come to pass? So reinstalling that courage in myself to keep going in the uncertainty, which epigenetically I'm a diplomat, for those of you that are versed in that. So uncertainty is definitely something that can create a freeze for me. So I think, and that was also part of how you and I met, was that really powerful portal in between me figuring out who I was again. So that definitely is probably the most courage that I have ever called upon in myself to keep going. In business, it was when I nearly went broke, like literally had the Centrelink application open going, do I go get a job or do I actually, or do I double down on my business and maybe allow the government to fund this project a little bit longer? And being like, no, this is what I choose. Like, I don't care how nonlinear this needs to be. Like, this is what I'm here for. So actually feeling that, even as I say that, I feel like deep in my sacral. It's like that sense of like, I don't care if I have to get a job part-time to make this thing happen. It's happening. So actually finding that resource inside myself to go, no, this is real and I'm committed to it 100%. And funnily enough, had my biggest year in business after that. So but yeah, that was definitely a moment of like, holy shit, my asshole is falling out right now.
That's one way to put it. What would you just say to someone who has the experience of their asshole falling out in that moment? What would you say to someone who's journeying that?
It's like, again, that's part of where those two stories kind of feed one into the other. Like I recognized in that moment, I'm like, well, I can go do the safe route, not have this experience of feeling so raw and exposed and the feeling of failure of having built something and lost it. And so that sense of being able to tune back into what it is that you really want to experience more than anything. We can really buy into a lot of the savior narrative and all the things I'm here to do for the world. It's like also, what am I here to do for myself? And what is it that I'm here to experience? And when I am on my deathbed, what am I going to look back and say that I'm glad that I actually applied myself to that, regardless of the outcome?
Mm-hmm. And what's been your journey with that, throughout business, throughout life, in terms of that deepening the understanding of, what you're here for, what you're here to be able to create in the world?
It's interesting. Like I think in newsflash for people that maybe aren't familiar with me that follow your stuff, I'm very much interested in magick, as in the Western esoteric tradition. And they talk about something called the true will, which is this idea that we all have a unique soul's purpose that we're here to bring through in this lifetime. And often when we look back over our life, there always seems to be these breadcrumbs, these clues around like pointing you in the direction of where it is that you're meant to head. So it's definitely been moments of looking for aliveness. That's one thing. It's like where do I feel most alive? Where do I access those states that time and space kind of seem to dissolve that sense of flow, like looking for those moments. But then also looking back, it's like, what are the core threads? Like, who have I been again and again? And what are these things that keep coming up for me? And so being able to be radically honest with those things and continue to deepen in your relationship with them. It's like, where do I see these pointing me towards? And also being okay with the fact that sometimes what you think you get was going to evolve. Like that, I think, is probably one of the things that often I'm supporting clients with. It's this sense of like, I'm so clear. And then all of a sudden it's no longer clear. So it's that sense of it's not now all wrong. It's like it's exactly what it needed to be to lead you to this point. So that's, I serve myself that medicine regularly.
How does it taste?
I get used to it. Not.
What's the other medicine that you catch yourself drinking for yourself all the time then?
That's a great question. Well, shadow is one of those things that I feel that I have had a very big relationship with. That sense of I've always had a psychological curiosity to understand what drives people. But I think it's like being radically honest with the parts of yourself you're still not including. It's like those aspects of self where you're like, oh, that is also not having a seat at the table. That aspect of me I am so determined to not include in this picture. And the cost of that, like the mental anguish, the unclear intentions, like that's such a big part of that magical current, is being able to be clear on your intent and the intention behind it, right? So when we're coming from a space of proving or excluding or compensating, it's like all of that shows up in how we magnetize and attract things to us. So for me, it's like, where am I still not okay with aspects of myself? Like even yesterday, I had a realization that I actually think I'm very stupid and I need to compensate for that very hard. And so like even in the evolution of the certification for me, like when I first brought it to be, it was very much about I wanted to be taken seriously. I wanted to be able to people to know that I know what I'm talking about. And being able to get to a point where I'm like, well, actually what I do is quite esoteric. It is quite metaphysical. But the thing is it gets results. And I don't really want to be arguing with people about whether or not magic exists. I just want you to change your life. So if you're not willing to maybe drop the need to get it, and to understand it and actually be like, but does it actually work? Then cool, let's do some stuff together.
Mm-hmm. How often do you see that playing out of people needing to get it and needing to understand it?
It's interesting because I often will find people playing in my field. And what I mean by that, for people that haven't experienced that, is like you can sense that people are almost in. It's like that sense of like, I want to work with you, but there's some part of me that just needs to be able to rationalize this. It's the intellectual part of us I need to be able to figure out what I'm actually buying here. And it's one of those things where I've had to evolve my relationship with that, because at times I used to get so frustrated. I'm like, what is it that, and that's also where my compensation mechanisms kicked in. It's like, I can explain magic. I can do all of the things. Look, I'm so smart and clever and it all makes sense. But ultimately people will know. There is a point that I've started to recognize that people recognize it inside themselves. It's something that you can create experiences to open a space and a clearing for that to show up inside them, but it's not something you can give them. So that's been a big learning.
Where have you noticed that you've wanted to give it to them?
When I see them repeating the same patterns, like I've literally had sales or calls with people 6, 12, 18 months apart with the exact same stuff showing up for them in their life and their business. And I'm like, I actually even said to one of them, we're back here again. Like, are you ready? But they weren't. And so there is this pull and this thing that keeps drawing them back there. But whatever it is for them isn't ready to let go. And so for me, it's like it's frustrating because I know what would open for them on the other side of that. But I've also needed to continue to cultivate that trust in their journey and their process, that it will come when they're ready.
What do you look at when you experience that internally then? So that's their experience. How do you create an expansion of your capacity to be able to, be with those people on an even deeper level, even when they're in their shit and you can see it?
I think that's part of the value of doing the work on yourself, like being able to see your own shit and like the way that you continue to sell out on the micro levels of things. It's like, so where am I still settling? Where am I needing for it to make sense? Like actually, taking a look in the mirror is such a big part of it. And also, as much as, some of the dresses in black and likes heavy metal music, this might sound a bit funny, but I also ultimately think love is such a big aspect of it. It's like being able to love someone where they're at. It's like, okay, this is the divine perfection of the unfolding of experience, and I get to love that for them.
Yeah. How do you go with that paradox of being able to hold, the divine perfection, the unfolding of the experience, and them being in that place of wanting to fight and change and fix everything, and wanting to be fixed?
Sometimes it's actually knowing, and this is where energetics for me is such a huge part of what it is that I do. Even on like, I don't sometimes even realize I'm doing it. It's like, but sometimes it's actually feeling where someone needs to be pushed into different parts of themselves. It's almost like starting to get someone to acclimatize with their own boundaries and edges. It's like I could actually lean into, say, more of a dark masculine archetype and really enroll them in that idea of like, it's time to get over your shit. Where are you settling? All of those things. And being able to actually push them further into the edges of where they're actually unconsciously holding onto their victim pattern. Other times it might actually be that I take the position of deeply loving them in it, and how that can also make them very uncomfortable. It's like that piece around, oh, this is actually where I'm not loving myself. And so being able to have that acuity to feel where someone's not occupying their own energy and what they're disowning, I think is been a big part of being able to integrate that paradox. It's like I can feel where you're not feeling yourself, and I'll help you access that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How important is that inner work then, for
How,
you as the facilitator, for you as the coach?
how important is my inner work? It is a non-negotiable. Like when I flake out on it, because I wish I would say that I'm perfect and I do it every day, there'll be seasons where I'm like, oh, everything's good, I'm fine, I'm fixed. But that ability to clean your own mirror, because with clients, like if you aren't tending to what's occurring in your field, when you're not clear on your shit, you're just going to project that all over other people. So being able to start to notice where you sell out your tendencies, your shadows, which is another reason I love working with astrology, because it's a blueprint. These archetypes are commonly the things that we default to. We default to the level of our systems. And for me, astrology is an energetic system that we are in relationship with always. So being able to become more aware of that also helps me in my inner work. It's like, oh, cool, there's that pattern again, because, I'm a Libra ascendant, so I have a tendency to people please. So it's like that obligation to keep harmony. So there's that one showing up again. So rather than me pushing somebody, maybe I'm just trying to be their friend. So yeah, being able to know those things, really important.
Great, thank you. And what's your relationship with all of the different identification systems that we have? Epigenetics, astrology, human design, gene keys, whatever it is. What's your relationship with that part of supporting people?
I had a wise mentor once tell me, when a tool becomes a rule, it's a problem. It was a Cody quote, but it's
I changed it now. It's actually different. It's when a tool becomes a rule, you begin to spiritually bypass. I've changed it.
I like it.
Yeah.
But it's true. Ultimately, it's like any map, model, or system breaks inevitably. And so I like to have these systems to be able to, one of the things I talk about with astrology particularly is being able to objectify the subjective. It's being able to have a model to be able to look at yourself, because the idea we can't see the forest for the trees is a thing. We can't see our own stuff often. So being able to have a point of looking outside yourself to see yourself can be extremely valuable. But when that starts to become the reason you can't do something, when it becomes the reason it's just the way that it is, it's like you're enabling yourself into a box. So for me, I'm always, whether or not it's an idea, a map, a model, a system, it's like, is this enhancing choice? If not, it's like, cool, I'm actually using this to cripple myself.
Cool. I love that. Definitely one of the things that we start to see playing out as more people evolve is they just fall into that identification, and I'm big into spiritual bypassing at the moment. That's why my quote's changed. And, identification with things becomes one of those other mechanisms that we start to spiritual bypass. So as we justify, create the reason around it, I'm just the activator, Gemini, something awesome person, then we justify staying the same. And I see that playing out with so many people in their journey, and it's an important part in their journey. And it's one of those things that we get to start to move past as well. What are some of the other things that you see playing out for people that people kind of get stuck in, where they've had their tools become a rule?
So aside from profiling systems, I think modalities become a problem. It's like, when you have a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail.
Yep.
And so being able to, and that's a big part of why I believe in a whole human approach. It's the idea of where are we meeting people spiritually, mentally, physically, energetically, emotionally. Because if you are constantly applying a mindset model to someone, you're going to keep seeking things at the same level. And, as Einstein said, we can't create something by the same level of thinking that created it. So being able to be diverse in where you access your information and where you meet people. So that's where I find people can get very hemmed in. Another one is communities. Like that's one of those things where it's like it's such a core need to belong, but then it's also becomes, who do I need to be the best coach? Who do I need to be the best spiritual person? It's like, and those have their own parameters and their own measuring sticks, and they then become the sticks with which we beat ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely see that playing out. As soon as we start to create like a strategy for success, that also becomes the same thing that we shame ourselves with in that exact same instance. Because if we have to do that thing, or we can never do that thing, then instantaneously, as soon as we do or don't do that thing, it's a perpetual shame cycle. So definitely see that playing out. What's the thing that you are currently journeying in your business and your life, in terms of what are you almost being forced to step into more courage with?
I love your questions. So for me, it's owning the bigness of the vision. And as I say that, I feel teary because there has been these seasons, and even just speaking back to community, where I definitely ran through my aspirations with a fine-tooth comb. But that fine-tooth comb happened to be cynicism, which is handy. Cynicism isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as you're cynical about your cynicism. But for me, there was a sense of, is this aspiration true for me, or is it just something that I think I should want? It's like, if we're talking about big, hairy, audacious goals, what sounds impressive when I share it with people that are my peers, right? So being able to get to the radical level of honesty, I'm like, oh no, this is on my heart. This isn't just something that I want to say to be in my ego and to look impressive. And so there was a level of protection. And this is the thing too, when you do a lot of work on yourself, you can often enroll yourself in the story that you're being above something just to protect yourself from actually owning it.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like recognizing the scope with which the school wants to grow to. It's like I eventually plan to on-teach this work and have people as faculty in the school, and I stay on as a director of the institute. And so for me, also recognizing like I want esoteric metaphysical information and personal development to be married in a way that it makes sense for people to access it. Because I think that there is so much noise out there and a lot of information, just hashtag witch talk. That's people, and that's also a stage on the journey. But then there is a period where it's like, well, actually, I am ready to evolve. Where do I go next? And that path can be quite obtuse and hard to navigate. So I would love for this to be something that people recognize as like, oh, I know that I want to connect to myself on a deeper spiritual level and connect to my power in a new way. Then, of course, this is the obvious pathway. So that's my aspiration, is for the school to be known as that place when you're ready to own that dimension of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I love that. What's been your journey with owning the inner witch then?
My journey with owning the inner witch. I think that's one of those ongoing processes because there are pockets of it that are still so prevalent. So definitely for me, there was the season where I was living in it unconsciously, parts where it was liberated, definitely through your help and support there too, like being able to recognize where I was holding on to old attachments that were no longer serving. and owning that to a degree, but then recognizing where it still shows up. It's like these pockets of satanic panic that are still kind of showing up in the collective field, even though there is such a huge acceptance of this concept of magic, more now than ever, or in recent history anyway. So there's this sense of, add that to cancel culture. It's like you've got this nice little cauldron brewing of like, alternative, fringe, spirituality, plus this, the thing that people don't understand. So they always tend to be afraid of things they don't understand. So there is this continually looking back inside myself of like, what is my intent and am I actually willing to stand up for this? Because that's been a huge part of it too, because I have got enough business knowledge now that I know I could make something profitable that's not this. Whereas this is what I choose. So it's like, does this actually matter enough to me? And yes, it does. So that's a big part of why I keep standing up for the witch. I keep standing up for magic. I keep standing up for these aspects of ourselves that are multidimensional, that deal with the unseen aspects of our humanity. So it's definitely been nonlinear, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. You consistently talk about things being nonlinear. Can you speak into that more for people who need a linear answer to understanding that?
I didn't realize even I use that term nonlinear so much. It's quantum, Cody. It's quantum.
Sorry. We need to get more spiritual buzzwords in.
But actually, now that I've made that correlation, that's a post. But what I mean by nonlinear is this idea, and this is something that I see particularly with high performers, people that are wanting to push their edges, is this sense of, oh, I've been here before. Why am I back here? Or I should be at a different level based on what I've experienced so far. And so that becomes a mechanism of remaining in the place that they are because they're living in the shadow of their potential. But what I mean by nonlinear is those patterns that we think we've worked through or the things that we've built a relationship around, and yet they seem to somehow resurface. The insecurities, new level, same devil experience. So that journey of me with integrating the witch has also meant facing off again with this idea of public persecution. Even though I felt like I worked through that. I've done the public persecution wound. It's like, oh no, it's back.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the things that we see play out with so many people that we work with. It comes in different flavors at different times. When we first get started, it's like being persecuted for just putting out content and things like that. But then it becomes about what we stand for and then the reputation that we've built and all the things that we've created. And if we're humans that, go with the aliveness, then they may be burning down processes that we go through that we've got to face off with to initiate ourselves into that new level of, shifting our relationship to everything that we've created and stepping into that new thing and destroying our own reputation before someone else can do it. So it's like almost persecuting ourselves to be able to create that relationship with how we can start to show up in the world on an even deeper level. And that willingness to be able to face off with that is, where we get much of our growth, because it's the shifting of, who we've needed to be seen as and needed to, hold the identity of. So for you then, what's the current experience of that in terms of your relationship with persecution?
I think because I'm very interested in the intersection between science and spirituality. It's such an exciting time that we're starting to understand so much more of these ancient principles, and science is catching up. That's kind of the way that I look at it. And anyway, if anyone wants to go down that rabbit hole a little bit more, psychoneuroimmunology is a term I learnt the other day, and I was like, well, we've known about that for a long time. Louise Hayes wrote about it ages ago, right?
Yeah.
But for me, there's this kind of sense of I want to honor the progress that has been made in a materialistic sense. That's, we do understand a lot more about who we are, where we come from. We know that the earth isn't flat. Like those aspects of scientific progress, I think, are valuable. And there is also a limitation. There is a point that we leap into the mystery where we are confronted with extra physical dimensions with which we don't have resources to be able to have a scientific relationship with. So when I think about public persecution, for me is that piece around how do I dance between the material and the mystery without doing an injustice to either. And so to put that another way, it's like I do sometimes wonder whether or not the work is dangerous, that accessing more of our potential than maybe we're ready for, and where people can latch onto things and recognizing that that's also a responsibility that I can do as much as I can, and there's a point that I need to surrender that. It's like somebody can take a shovel and hit someone over the head, or they can, dig something to create a well and feed many people. It's not the person that made the shovel's fault. So that piece around public persecution, I'd say, is probably still alive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
That was your question, right?
I don't remember.
I was like, well, that's what felt true.
If you asked me what any of the questions that I've asked today are, then I wouldn't be able to give you an answer.
Great. We went where we needed to.
Great. This is how we work. What's the primary, wound or shadow that you are seeing in the industry playing out on a collective level the most at the moment?
I feel that there is a racing that's occurring right now, and partially due to the advent of AI. It's this idea that one of the stories that used to be very comfortable for people is time expense. It's like how long something's going to take to action and execute. And now that we have all of these tools at our disposal, that execution becomes so much faster, there is almost this extra layer of, well, I've got everything. I've got the world at my fingertips. Why aren't there yet? And so that I'm noticing a lot, or if somebody else has got it, it's like, well, why them, not me? That seems to be very alive, and that speed of implementation and comparing oneself, very alive.
Mm-hmm. And what do you say to people like that?
So and this is where I feel that having some access to your spirituality, being able to see things, even if you don't relate to the term spirituality, being able to see things from a meta level, being able to remove yourself from the immediate experience and see a bigger time horizon. It's like, what is available to you in an experience where maybe implementation isn't happening as effortlessly as you would like? It's like those Steve Jobs' commencement speech. I often go back and rewatch that piece where he talked about things don't always make sense looking forward. We connect the dots looking backwards. And, if he hadn't taken that typology class, the UI or the user interface for Mac would have looked completely different. So even though it might be a tangent now, like how do you create the foresight to see the hindsight, to be able to build an empowering relationship with where you are? Because that's really what's going to cultivate momentum, rather than you looking outside yourself for where you think you should be.
Mm-hmm. And what are some steps for people to be able to do that?
To cultivate the foresight, to have the hindsight?
Yes.
So one of the best ways to look at that is through shadow work, being able to figure out why you secretly want what you think you don't want, having as evidence as wanting. So being able to play in the possibility of, if I could guess why it is that I secretly want to be where I am, why would that be? And playing in that possibility at first, there will be layers of resistance. Likelihood is you're not going to want to admit those things to yourself. But the more that you can play in the possibility, that's often what I invite my clients into, is like, okay, guess. If it doesn't have to be perfect, if you could just throw spaghetti at the wall, let's play here. And then within a few, five times usually, by 5, it's usually like starting to land. It's like, oh, these aren't guesses anymore. I'm actually hitting something. So you have that permission to explore things that maybe you're not seeing.
Mm-hmm. What do you notice with people in their resistance to that relationship with them often looking externally for permission?
So what do I find when people are looking externally for permission? It's interesting because I would say that a lot of the clients I work with are definitely pioneers. There is this wounding around the idea of what I'm wanting to create, what I'm wanting to build hasn't been seen in this exact capacity yet. It's like, this is a blueprint that I am building as I build it. So there may be things that are similar, but not the same. So often, like, I find that seeking a permission is almost like, am I crazy? It's like, am I crazy to even dream this into being? Should I just do the things that make sense in the rational, logical, step-by-step model? So being able to identify what it is that you're actually looking for from the permission. It's like, is it the fact that you want somebody to tell you that you're not mad? Is it the fact that you want someone to tell you that the idea is valid? And the other one is like, am I ready? And so that's that expanding into the energetic capacity of knowing that nobody's going to come along to tell you that you're ready. It's an internal decision, much like I mentioned before with that decision in me when I nearly lost everything. That piece around like, okay, my asshole is falling out, and it's like, I choose this. It's like being able to come back to giving yourself the permission.
Mm-hmm. What do you say to people when they're in that journey of like asking themselves, am I ready?
Am I ready? Just thinking about a few different thresholds of that. It's like, am I ready to start running a group program? Am I ready to put out my modality? Am I ready to write the book? It's like there's like various iterations of it. I often will take people to the point of recognizing where they're resisting the failure. Because if you can actually meet that somatically and move through the failure, the places in your body that you're actually avoiding the sensation. So one of my teachers talks about man will run 1,000 miles to avoid the sensations in his body. And so if you can actually come back to that sense of what is it that I'm actually avoiding feeling? Because ultimately anything we're looking to create externally or internally is all about really what we want to feel. So like, what is it that I don't want to feel? So being able to come back to that point of integrating the sensations of failure so that I no longer have power.
Mm-hmm. And how important is it for us to be able to create that deeper relationship with the sensations then?
That to me is one of the core pillars of what I do, because we're always responding to that. It's happening in a microsecond. We are getting feedback. I often talk about the fact that we are antenna for data input from multiple planes, physically, energetically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. So we are constantly receiving sensations, whether or not it's through our physical senses or through our extra physical senses, through our intuitive senses. So the more that we actually dial in our capacity to be present with sensation, the more information we're actually receiving, not only about ourselves, but the world around us. And the less that we're hooking into running old patterns. So we often will avoid sensations that have been unpleasant to us, and those are where we will hide from our power in them. It's like, I don't want to feel that again. So it's like we can face that. We no longer need to run a pattern of avoidance, and we get to choose from a place of empowerment. So tolerance to heightened sensation, like your asshole falling out, is also valuable in business. So you can make a decision from clarity as opposed to avoidance.
Mm-hmm. And what do you notice with people when they're in that experience of just avoiding things, avoiding the sensations?
What do I notice? Well, intellectualization is a big part. It's like people love to live in their heads when it's scary to feel. And so being able to understand when you're going into the pattern of looping, overthinking, overanalysis, chances are that there is something inside you that you are uncomfortable with. It's like even the therapeutic model of labeling a lot of things as anxiety, like to me, it's actually just discomfort. It's like I'm actually uncomfortable in my body right now. And how can I start to resource myself to be comfortable with that?
And in terms of, intellectualizing, labeling, or even spiritualizing things, what do you see plays out with people when they're consistently, looping in all of those things to be able to disconnect, to avoid the feeling?
So when people are looping in the labels, looping the spirituality to avoid the sensations, and what do I notice as a result of that? It's a sense of plateau in a lot of ways. We tend to observe that when people are in that, it's things slow down. Because if anything, like those sensations, that energy, the things that are moving through you that you are resisting, is like you're turning the tap off. It's like if this is the channel and this is the pipe and this is where life moves through you, when you're not letting life move through you, life stops moving through you. And so this is where things start to feel stuck and static, and you start to notice yourself be less present in experience, in relationship, in business, and you're living inside your head. You're not living in the world.
How prevalent do you see that?
one of the beautiful things is I feel like I've got to a level with the people that I work with that they often will check themselves. So that's really cool for me. Like one of the best bits of feedback that I'll often get from clients is like, you know what I noticed the other day? I was going into a meeting and I was really overthinking. So I went into my car and screamed. It's like that sense of the energy needed to move. But out in society, like I feel like outside of my bubble, I feel that we are programmed to live in our mind. So that we are constantly having our attention hijacked. And so we're taught to value the intellect above all.
Mm-hmm. And what is your relationship with that being set up for us to have an entire reality we're in our head rather than our body?
What is my relationship with that? This is where like a big undercurrent of what I work with is relating with the feminine principle, and being able to understand that the feminine principle is the body, it is the earth, it is the extra physical dimensions of who we are in a lot of aspects. So when we are taught to value our mind and our intellect above all else, what we're also disconnecting from is self-nurture. And so my relationship with observing that in people is that they're actually cutting themselves off from power. And what I mean by power is often I talk about the five bodies in relationship with like the wheels of a car. If you're driving and your wheels are all pointing, you're going in a direction, you have traction. When you have things that are out of alignment, like maybe your head's going one way, but your physical reality, your body, what's happening inside is in another direction, what you're going to notice is that there's dissonance. So a lot of people are living in dissonance, and but being able to come back, like to me, when I see that in people, I'm like, it's just you have so much more to give, so much more to express. Like I feel that we all have that true will, this thing that we're here to bring through to the world. And when we have one wheel that's totally off in a different direction, just seeing how they're diminishing their power. And something that makes me feel so alive to see that come back online for people. So there is grief. There is grief for me in that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when people are journeying grief, obviously you've journeyed a lot of grief throughout your life. How do you support them with that?
Grief.
Especially because I don't know if it's 100% accurate, but I've heard many times that grief is the hardest emotion for men to be able to experience as well. It's often covered with everything else.
People navigating grief. One of the big pieces of my work as well is teaching people about the spectrum of experience and being able to see that the degree to which we experience grief is also the degree to which we experience love. So it's really about being able to create a safety in the heart to be in the pendulation of that experience. So what in you do you need to be able to be with your heart in that? Sometimes it is the perspective of being able to access the foresight to see the hindsight and still being very much of the human. It's like being able to hold the frame of ultimately this is me being cracked open to more life to move through me without needing to make the part of you that is struggling wrong.
Mm-hmm. And what is your journey or your edge with bringing your heart more into everything that you're doing?
My journey and my edge is bringing more of my heart into what it is that I'm doing.
And while you tune into that, I'll give an example for me. The holographic method is where we crack people open in a moment of grace, where they have their heart crack open because they see the divine perfection of something. And over the weekend, I was in an event, and they're talking about being in your heart and all of these things. And what I recognized for me was that there was this deeper point of me running my entire business from being critical of everything or cynical, which is, really great because forces people to grow. But then if we're coming from that place and that wound, then there's only so long people can tolerate that. if you don't have the capacity to be in your heart, then that's only going to create a certain level of depth for people. So it was my initiation into, how can I be in my heart on an even deeper level, so that people can have that space open up in them. So that's an example for me. I would love to know what your current relationship with deepening into your heart is.
It's interesting because I find that often when people come to work with me, it's like I look like the initiation into the underworld. There is that kind of Hades, like, okay, we're doing shadow work, people. But it's like so much of what I support people with is compassion and curiosity. It's like compassion and curiosity and safety. Like that's actually such a big core piece of it. Doesn't sound sexy, but trust me, like if you want to go to the depths of intensity with somebody, that compassion, curiosity, safety is the thing that actually allows you to come back rather than remain in the drowning. And that's one thing I see so many people miss. It's like, oh, cool, we want to do intense, we want to do hard. And they just don't actually understand the spectrum of containment and catharsis. So people need to learn to contain themselves before they can actually move into process of real catharsis, and that's why people go deeper. But aside from that, for me, like owning my heart even more is the fact that I sometimes really do feel I'm way too sensitive. It's like I will have clients send me a voicemail and I'll be sitting there crying, listening to them go through their breakthrough. It's like, the thing that we've been working on for months, and suddenly they've had the conversation with the person that they've been putting off, and I have to take a few moments before I reply. Like, okay, voice of neutrality here. So I think it's actually being witnessed in my sensitivity more.
Wow, big.
Yes.
Easy to say, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the times that kind of plays out for us, though, right? We have that recognition of the thing, and we have a recognition of the thing, but we still kind of kick it down the road to be able to keep some level of safety for it. I recognize, over the weekend in the event, I was like, I'll wait till, because I'd done the event before, I'll wait till this experience because I know that that's when all my shit's going to come up around that thing. It's like, I'll wait till then rather than just bring it forth straight away and get the initiation up front. I'll wait till I get to that point because I know it will come up then, rather than consciously starting to, initiate myself into it before that so that I could get an extra level of it. So it was this recognition of what's playing out, and that was definitely and is definitely a journey for me to be able to go, okay, cool, well, where am I doing that? Where am I recognizing this as the thing? And then also just, touching it, moving towards it just a little bit and then back, and then moving towards it a little bit and then back. And because it gets to that point where it gets really shitty before it gets better sometimes. How do you relate to yourself when you're in that?
When it's shitty? How do I relate to myself when it's shitty? Like, what do we want this morning, yesterday? It's like, that's the piece. It's like it's so overused, but it's one of those ones that I always default back to is this too shall pass.
Yeah.
It's one of those ones you're just like, you hear it and you're in it, and the first time you're like, ugh, it's thank you for the Hallmark card, but it's being able to, and then also like, yes, this too shall pass, and what's here for me, that next question. And that's the other one I often find people start to loop in the what's here for me, what's the lesson, what do I need to learn? It's just like, just go do the thing. That's what needs to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, being able to, like, when it is shitty, being okay, it's like, is this a case of me needing to move into the vibrational components? Is it the part of me meeting myself emotionally, sensationally, energetically, and allowing what is here for me to be felt and completed, which is what MCM is all about, Metatonic Completion Method? Or is it about the fact that it's like there is an action step that I'm avoiding here? It's like, what is the action? And sometimes it is about being willing to be the baby giraffe and find your feet in the action. So that for me, when things get shitty, is it like, do I need to hold myself right now? Is it that I need to meet things and integrate them? Or is it the fact that I just need to continue to hold myself? It's always about holding oneself and take the action.
Mm-hmm. What would you say to someone who's in that experience, like right now, they're listening to this right now, they recognize that there's the action, they recognize that they know what they need to do, but they're not doing it?
I turn the podcast off and go do it. No, wait to the end. But They recognize that they're not taking the action, but they know what they need to do.
Yeah.
It's like, if not now, when? It's like, what does readiness actually look like? Like getting radically honest with what this thing you continue to push outside yourself is. So like, what does readiness look like? And if that was available to you right now, you are the cosmos unfolded into a tiny person. Like, if that readiness is available to you right now, what does it change? And if you could access that readiness, you could access the thing that needs to change, why not now?
Great. Thank you. What do you think has been the biggest, most transformational experience that you've had in a course or in an event room or in anything? What do you think, if you had one moment that changed the trajectory of your life in personal development, what do you think that would be?
One moment that changed the trajectory of my life. I don't think I may have shared this story with you, but it wasn't actually in a course. So I'm just thinking that we've got to, is the parameter it has to be in
personal development.
In personal development, okay.
Because we get those things in life which are dished up to us, but when we've got that experience where we've stepped into something and we know that we're stepping into something, and then we get that shift because we've consciously and courageously stepped into the thing, it's entirely different to it being dished up for us from the universe. Because there's an intentionality that we bring to it first, rather than getting the Mack truck. The Mack truck's the easy thing, right? Well, it's completely fucked in it, but it's easy to, because it's so here that there's no escaping it now.
Yeah, I'm in my surrender because I have to be.
Yes. Because I've done everything that I can to avoid it for so long.
Exactly. Well, it was personal development adjacent. That'll be a story for you and I later. That's why I was like, does it have to be in the course? Like, because it was kind of the beginning of a personal development thing. But like in the container.
It could be in the container. It could be around it. It's just like the piece is really, we've consciously started to step into a new pathway, a new direction. And the personal development, we've consciously stepped into it where that's been a massive trajectory shift for us.
It's actually really sad because this is no longer available in its past iteration, but I'm hoping that someone picks up the torch. But when I think back to like an experience that changed everything for me, it was going through the Wild Grace initiation, which was a feminine mystery school, very much about sinking someone back into their body and being able to connect with the aspects of self that we hide from. And that experience for me, like the moment when it really landed, was actually, it was a dark masculine archetypal initiation. There was this recognition of the availability of power inside myself that I hadn't felt. It was that sense of, oh, this is something I can turn on. It's not permission outside myself. Like it's actually here if I choose it. And also that recognition of like how much further we will go when we think somebody else is on the line rather than ourselves, which was huge. I was like, wow, like this power is available to me, and I will recruit it so much easier if it's for someone else. So that experience and that within it was that moment of recognition. It was like, oh, I can command this at will.
I love that. So, in that kind of realm then, how important do you think it is for someone to be able to create that in terms of a mystery school?
How important is it, I think, for people to be able to access their power in terms of a mystery school?
Yeah, how someone to be able to pick up that torch and, carry that transmission into the world.
I think it's really important. I am doing it. It's interesting. I say that the old format and nostalgia goggles, right?
Yeah.
It's that piece around being able to see like, oh, I'd love for people to be able to experience it in the way I experienced it because it was really great, and also recognizing that deaths and rebirths and alchemy happens for a purpose. So I know that there are aspects of that transmission that are being brought through in new and different ways, including through my work, and I think it's really important for people to actually recognize what they're capable of and feel it. Because there is this, when we look at a lot of hype that can occur in the personal development space, there's that felt sense of anything's possible. you know, and it's just like, yay, now I'm out of the room. Why does it feel like everything's still the fucking same? And so it's that sense of like, actually, no, this is in me. It's like, it's in me, and this is a resource that I have. Nothing outside me is responsible for this. I choose it. I can do it. And so, and not from the space of like, I need to be super hyper independent, but it's like that piece around like this power within me, I own and I claim. So I think it's very important for people to be able to do that. So what was the question? How important is it? Very.
So what would, if you were to bring that to a new level in your work, what would be the initiation for you in that?
What would the initiation be for me in that? I'm in it. Cody kicked the bottle.
It's a spiritual sign, because everything's a spiritual sign.
That's it. So because Artemisia up until this year was a certification.
Yep.
And that was coming from that place of me needing for people to understand it and to get it. So it has always been a mystery school, and there was a degree of my readiness to acknowledge that, and that it is an initiation into power, and it is an initiation into claiming those aspects of yourself that do have a burning legacy inside you. So my initiation into that is being okay with it being something that exists outside of me more than I'm probably comfortable with. There was very much a sense of like, oh, I do it. Like, oh, I do the thing. It's like, yeah, I'm co-creating with a mystery, but I do it. And now it's a sense of like, oh, it's bigger. Well. Oh, okay, this is something I'm in relationship with actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Love it. What would you say to people as we start to wrap up in terms of them, you know, stepping into that new level of courage? They have that recognition of what's kind of playing out in their life, and they feel it, they see it right in front of them, and they're on the edge of ruthlessly stepping into that initiation, but they've still got one step left. What would you say to them?
What haven't you tasted from where you still are that you need more of?
Juicy. What have you tasted? I love that. What's the best way for people to be able to get in contact with you?
Probably on Instagram at the Jessicka Anne. That's my main hub. Otherwise, via my website, jessickaanne.com.
Love it. Thank you for an amazing episode.
Thank you, Cody. Thanks for having me.